Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. Starting us off is Chris from That's Not CEDH on the War Doctor and K-9. This is a Jessica partner pairing that is an interesting take on the normal Jessica Underworld Breach list. Aiming to use K-9 as a bit of added protection, while using the War Doctor to snipe important creatures while also being a 2-card combo with Thought Lash. Next up is Charles, the mono white guy, although he's apparently moved on to Simic, as today he's piloting Xolatoyac, the Smiling Flood. This deck is actually borrowed from Anthony at Listener Altars, but Charles wanted to try out the Staxolotl for himself. As the name suggests, this is a Simic stax deck, aiming to abuse his commander's ETB and attack trigger to create a mini Seedborn Muse, mess with people's mana base, or breach parity with cards such as Choke. This is a super interesting take on the color pie. In the third spot is Hidden Planet X on Lonis, Genetics Expert. This is also Anthony's list that he let me borrow for the game, since I saw him talking about it on Twitter. This is almost opposite the previous list. Lonis is a combo engine, running many unique combos with the commander, while also being a value engine that lets you grind into the late game. Another great list that I really enjoyed getting to try out. And bringing up the rear is Misha, another member of That's Not CEDH. And if you haven't heard, they'll be helping out running Saltfest, a 10K CEDH tournament being held in Orlando, Florida, in just a few weeks. So for all those tournament grinders, make sure you're signed up, as I'm sure it'll be a really cool event. And today he's on Godo, Bandit Warlord. One of the old pillars of the format, Godo is all about inevitability and speed. Being able to just combo out just with him from the commander and enough mana needed, he's always a threat and really needs to be taken care of. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. Chris starts off the game with an untapped Steam Vents, using it to cast his commander K-9 Mark 1. Charles has an island into a Soul Ring. Hidden as a Misty Rainforest, cracking the fetch for a tropical island. He follows that up with a Mana Crypt and taps the Crypt for an Arcane Signet and a Lotus Petal, passing after that. Misha has a Mountain and also casts a Mana Crypt, following that up with a Jeweled Lotus, which doesn't stay for long as he cracks it to help us cast his commander Godo, who resolves and grabs him a Helm of the Host off the ETB. Chris casts a Soul Ring and a Lotus Petal, although those aren't answers to Godo, as he ends his turn with a Mana Vault. Charles untaps, draws, and actually just passes the turn over, with Hidden at his end step channeling a Boseiju to blow up the Helm, with Misha grabbing out a Mountain. Hidden then heads to his turn and loses his Crypt Flip. The Boseiju was unfortunately supposed to be his land drop, as he spends his turn casting his commander Lonis. Misha is safe from his Crypt and plays out a Mountain. 3 mana then gets him a Goblin Matron, which reads search your library for target dockside. Misha then casts the Goblin, with Chris and Hidden greeting by not cracking their Lotus Petals. Dockside then resolves and nets Misha 8 treasure. He then spends 3 treasure on an Imperial Recruiter, which finds him a Goblin Welder 2 hand. Misha then heads to combat and sends Godo at Chris for 3. Chris untaps, draws, misses a land drop, and decides to keep his mana open as he hands the turn over. Charles has a Tendo Icebridge as land, and for 4 casts a One Ring. He gains protection and taps it to draw a card. Hidden misses another land and casts a Fabricate. He also remembers to roll for Crypt and is safe, but goes searching. He had originally thought about just grabbing out a Soul Ring, but instead pulls out an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, since he saw the Welder coming. He then sacrifices his petal to help cast the artifact, and ends his turn tapping the Cauldron to exile the Helm just in case. Misha is safe from his Crypt and plays out an Urza's Saga. He then casts a Basalt Monolith and then casts his Tutored Welder. He is down to 2 cards in hand and decides to just fire off a Wheel of Fortune to hopefully refill. But Chris does have a response as he casts a Flusterstorm, to which Misha simply cracks a few treasure to pay for it. And while the Fluster is paid for, Chris has more responses as he abrades the Godo, killing the commander. But after that, the wheel does resolve, with notable discards being Misha discarding an Argentum armor, and Hidden discarding a Hullbreaker Horror. Then, after everyone has drawn their cards, Misha casts a Blood Moon. The enchantment resolves, although he ends up losing out on his Urza Saga. Finally, he ends his turn sending his Dockside at Chris for 1. Chris has another quick turn, just playing a Tundra Mountain as land for turn. Charles untaps, loses 1 from his ring, and then taps it to draw 2 this time. He has a Waterlogged Mountain as land and casts a Mana Vault. But he holds priority to actually cast an Offer You Can't Refuse on it, since he really needs that colored mana at the moment. Hidden takes 3 from his crypt and has a basic island. Hidden then taps 2 to cast a Ledger Shredder. The bird resolves and triggers Lonis to evolve, which nets Hidden a clue out of the mix. Hidden then follows it up with the Sylvan Library, which is his second spell, which triggers the bird to connive. Hidden discards a Chain of Vapor to put a counter on the bird, although he originally had thought this would also make a clue, but has to hand the turn over after that. Misha takes 3 from his crypts. He draws and casts a Grim Monolith. He then heads to combat and sends 1 at Chris, with 2 points of damage heading at Charles. Chris has a Marsh Mountain and passes, with Misha at his end step welding out Charles' 1 ring with his Mana Vault. Charles doesn't take any extra damage now that his 1 ring is gone, and uses his new Mana Vault to help cast his commander, Xolatoyac, the Smiling Flood. He does need to use 1 of his treasures to do so. The commander then ETBs and puts a flood counter on his Waterlogged Grove. Charles then hands the turn over, but at his end step, Misha alternate casts a Thunderclap to deal 3 damage to Hidden's Lonis. Although Hidden just responds by activating his Cauldron to eat Charles' Seedworm Muse and put a counter on Lonis, which also nets Hidden a clue. Charles then discards an Urza Saga due to hand size, and also untaps his permanents with counters on them. Hidden takes 3 more from his crypt and plays a City of Mountains. He was so excited from keeping his Lonis that he actually forgot to Sylvan, and quickly casts a Forensic Gadgeteer. The creature resolves, with Misha at his end step paying 3 to untap his Monolith. Misha takes 3 from his crypt and then plays out a mountain. He then ends his turn with combat, sending the Dockside at Chris for 1. Chris has an Arid Mountain as land and continues to pass. Charles untaps and pays to untap his vault, with him on his main phase casting a Displacer Kitten. Hidden does respond by cracking a clue and triggering Lonis to put a counter on his Gadgeteer. Hidden then cracks his other clue and puts another counter on the Gadgeteer, but that's the end of responses as the cat resolves. Charles then heads to combat and sends his Quaddle at Misha for 6, with the on attack trigger putting a flood counter on his basic island. Misha does chump with his Recruiter, with Charles at his end step untapping his countered permanents. Hidden takes 3 from his crypt and then activates his Sylvan. He takes 8 to just keep digging through his library, and then plays a Command Mountain. And while he does have mostly mountains at this point, he taps for 4 to cast the 1 ring. This triggers the Gadgeteer to investigate. The ring resolves, with Hidden then following that up with a Phyrexian Metamorph. This triggers the Ledger Shredder, but responding to this, Charles casts a Remand. This triggers his cat to blink his Mana Vault, with the Remand then resolving, bouncing the spell, and drawing Charles a card. With Hidden then conniving away a Prismatic Vista. And at his end step, Misha welds away Charles' K-9 for his Lotus Petal. Misha takes another 3 from his crypt and then dashes in a Ragavan. He then heads to combat and sends the team at Chris for 4. There are no blocks, with Ragavan exiling a basic island off the top of Chris's library, and Misha making a treasure. Chris has a Scalding Mountain and uses his newly acquired Lotus Petal to actually cast his commander, the War Doctor. Charles on his turn heads straight to combat. He sends his commander at Misha, with the on-attack trigger putting a flood counter on one of Misha's tapped mountains, with Charles on his second main casting a Savor the Moment. This triggers the cat to blink his commander, and with that on the stack, Hidden taps his ring to draw. but there are no responses, and Charles puts another flood counter on Misha's other tapped mountain. He then heads to his end step, untaps his stuff, and then heads to his extra turn. Charles technically doesn't untap on this turn, and plays a gemstone mountain as land for turn. He then heads to combat and sends 6 more at Misha, this time making his gemstone an island, with Charles on his second main casting a choke. This triggers the cat to blink his commander, this time making Hidden's command tower an island. Hidden then heads to his turn and doesn't untap his islands. He takes 3 from his mana crypt and then 1 from his ring. He does find a forest off the top and then casts a Phyrexian Metamorph, taking 2 life from that as well. But Charles has a response as he hard casts a Force of Will. He has another cat trigger and this time points it at his mana vault. But with the trigger on the stack, Hidden casts a Veil of Summer, to which Charles pays 2 life to mental misstep it. This puts a Ledger Shredder and Displacer Kitten trigger on the stack, with Charles blinking his commander to make Hidden's forest a tropical island, with Hidden conniving away a wooded foothills. Hidden then taps his ring to draw 2, but didn't draw what he wanted, as he pays 1 to crack a clue to draw, also putting a +1/+1 counter on his Gadgeteer. But no luck, as the stack resolves, with the mental countering the Veil, and the forest countering the Metamorph. Hidden then casts a Mox Opal into a Mana Vault, triggering to investigate, with Misha at his end step activating his welder to weld out his treasure for an Argentum armor, to which Hidden exiles it with his Soul Cauldron, which also triggers the War Doctor. Misha untaps and takes 3 from his mana crypt. The Soul Cauldron is finally tapped, so Misha welds it for Lotus Petal. He then plays out a mountain and then recasts Godo once again. The commander resolves, and on ETB he finds a Hammer of Nazan, which auto-equips on ETB to Godo. Chris has a wooded mountain and once again hands the turn over. And unfortunately there is an error here as Charles untaps all of his islands. He then plays out an island as land for turn and then heads to combat. He sends his commander at Misha and then floods Hidden City of Brass. Misha then heads to block and double blocks with Godo and his dockside. But before damage happens, Charles channels out an Otawaro to bounce the hammer and eat both Misha's creatures, with Charles at his end step untapping his stuff. Hidden untaps, loses another mana crypt trigger, and then takes 2 from his ring. He then casts a Tarian Soul Cleaver. He triggers the Gadgeteer to make a clue and then equips up his Lonis. Another force then comes out as land for turn, with him following that up with an Eternal Witness to grab out his Soul Cauldron back to hand. Hidden then cracks his Petal for mana, which triggers Lonis to grow and make another clue. And at this point, Hidden realizes he messed up and actually did have a win attempt if he had done things a little differently. So instead, he taps his One Ring to draw and then casts his Soul Ring. He investigates once more and then connives off his Ledger Shredder, discarding a Walking Ballista. Next up, he casts his Soul Cauldron, making another clue. The Cauldron is then tapped to exile the Ballista and trigger the War Doctor. Hidden then removes a counter off his bird to kill the Goblin Welder, but is done after that. Misha takes 3 from his crypt and doesn't have much left. He casts a Ragavan and then his hammer, which will auto-equip targeting the monkey. Hidden removes a counter and takes the monkey out though, which adds a counter back due to his equipment, and another clue. Chris has a Sacred Mountain and then heads to attacks. And now is where Hidden messes up again. He wasn't thinking about it, but the Doctor can just blast him with his on-attack trigger, and he'll die on his upkeep. So he should have killed the creature before that. And even to make sure it happens, Chris exiles a Simian Spirit Guide from his hand to up the Doctor count. Hidden takes 3 off the attack, with Misha taking 3 as well, with Hidden at his end step removing 2 counters to take out the Displacer Kitten, which gets him 1 more counter and a clue. And while he's at it, he also removes counters to kill the Axolotl as well, gaining him 1 more counter and another clue. Charles heads to his turn, draws, and passes the turn, with Hidden at his end step cracking 2 clues to draw, which gives him 2 counters and 2 clues back. Hidden is in crunch mode as he untaps. He has a Mana Crypt, Vault, and One Ring trigger on the stack. He taps the One Ring to draw 4 cards, and they're not what he needs. And unfortunately, he's not familiar enough with the list, so he crop rotations away his force to see if there even has an out. He finds a basic island and knows there are cards that will save him as he starts cracking clues to draw. He cracks 2 clues and then another, and another until he's out of mana, and unfortunately dies of his own hubris. Misha untaps and is saved from his crypt. He has a Gemstone Mountain and then Desperate Rituals, which lets him recast Godo again. He finds a Conqueror's Flail on ETB, which due to the hammer equips up to Godo, as he hands the turn over after that. Chris on his turn casts a Phyrexian Metamorph, which enters as a copy of Misha's Arcane Signet. He has a Fiery Mountain as land and it heads to combat. He sends his Doctor at Charles, but points 3 damage at Misha. There are no effects, and both take 3. Charles on his turn casts an Urza, Lord High Artificer, who on ETB makes a construct. Charles apparently has nothing better to do and decides to just YOLO it as he activates Urza. He shuffles and exiles a Gemstone Caverns, which will trigger the War Doctor, with Charles playing the land for turn. Misha takes 3 from his crypt and plays out a Crystal Mountain and passes. Chris heads straight to combat.
I am going to...
Do your best.
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to swing War Doctor at you, trigger ability, fort your face.
Yes, I'm dead.
Then on his second main, he cracks all 3 of his fetches. He finds a Plains, Volcanic Island, and an untapped Hollowed Fountain. Also, Charles did float a red and uses that to crack a Waterlogged Grove to draw, with Charles also cracking his Fiery Islet to draw as well. He then casts an Esper Sentinel and a Ranger Captain. He searches out a Ragavan, but chooses to leave the monkey in hand for now. Charles is now feeling the pain of his own choke, as he takes 1 off his tap mana vault. He then plays and cracks a Misty Rainforest, with Chris deciding to crack his Ranger Captain just in case, with Charles finding a forest off the fetch and passing after that. Chris plays out a City of Brass and decides to just slam down his Thought Lash. It resolves, but heading to combat, Charles Boseju's the enchantment, to which Chris free casts a Deflecting Swat on his own mana vault. And with that, Chris can just activate his Thought Lash for 40, triggering his Doctor to blast Charles, winning Chris the game. Game review. Man, that was a blast. It was actually the last game we played at Chicago, and they were literally tearing the place apart as we finished up. I want to thank Anthony a whole bunch for letting us borrow his 2 decks, as they really were a blast to check out. Although, I know, I misplayed Lonis probably. I really thought I was going for 1 combo, when in turns, I wasn't going for any at all. Although, when Lonis did get online, it really was a blast to see him churn through the deck. Although, to be honest, I didn't even think we were going to get there, when Misha had such a fast Godo start, and if not for that Boseju, I think this game wouldn't have gone on nearly as long. Although Misha was able to slow the game down after the fact with that Blood Moon, and that Wheel of Fortune actually took Chris out more than we originally imagined, as his new hand had 5 whole lands, which didn't do a whole lot. But that ended up being a positive, as it gave him a Shield of Anonymity that let him do whatever he wanted, albeit not a whole lot. Although, to be fair, I think all eyes really were on Charles, at least in my opinion. I really thought he had it when he started really going off with his commander and that choke. Whew, I thought we were done for. But it turns out his hand was full of green cards and no green mana to cast it. And when I removed his commander, he really was out of it under his own choke. And that let Chris slide in for the win, and that's all we can say about that. And as always, I want to thank anyone who joined for the games. And I want to thank all of our special Patreon members as well. Sly Fox, Tango Down, and Holy Septic for their support of the channel. along with all of our other Patreon supporters as well. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.